Hello and welcome back. We are down to our last session today. It has been a really interesting day and we've still got more coming up with Nichole here. So I'm just going to do a quick intro and then I will hand over. So Nichole is an award-winning campaigner, coach, consultant and motivation speaker on race, equality and inclusion. She is a multi-award winner, and this session is called Resistance is Futile. So I will hand over to Nichole.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning all. And my name's Nichole, and I'm going to share with you 3 things about myself. And one of these things could have completely derailed me and removed me from my purpose. Fear. Fear is something that has been probably a big part of my life, and I still have a relationship, but it's a better relationship. So this is me at around 4 or 5 years old, quite a shy child, and that went with me. As I went through life, I realized that for some reason, people always wanted me to be in the forefront, always wanted me to speak up. And I wanted to. I had that deep inside and I wanted to speak up, especially around injustice, especially around people who are being marginalized and things are not going right for others. Hence, I'm now a coach. But let's get back to fear. This is what it looked like for me. This door, I just couldn't go through that door. But I realized that there was something inside that made me want to speak up. Something that made me want to say, I can do this. But fear's quite crippling. I remember going to a session similar to how you're all here today, and it was a motivational session. And the speaker said something really powerful, and I'm going to share that with you. He said that fear has 2 meanings. One of them is fuck everything and run, or face everything and rise. And that day I thought, I always do the first one. I run for the hills. I get that feeling that I can't speak out. I was petrified of public speaking. That's ironic, seeing that I'm sitting here now and I'm speaking to all of you. However, I was, and I still am. So fear was a crippler for me. But that day I said to myself, I'm going to start to face everything and rise. What I also noticed in this process was my passion. And passion is similar to this image here, when you're just running and you just love what you do. You just have this passion, and fear was there, passion is here, and they were fighting against each other. I did it anyway, even though the fear was always there. But I'll tell you something else I noticed in this process was my purpose. And I realized that my purpose was tied to my passion. And I'll tell you, one of the things that got me into this space of speaking about diversity and inclusion, racial equality, belonging, equity, and all of these things is that when I was working in my last organization, which is a Chartered Institute for Personal Development, and I was the co-chair for the Race Equality Group. And I had to start speaking even more. So when you're an advocate and you're an activist, of course you speak amongst your peers, you do some speaking here and there, but I realized that I had to actually speak up for people in the organization and speak about race equality, which is difficult. When we're talking about anyone that's being marginalized or oppressed, it's difficult. But then my purpose and my passion just broke through. And I felt like this butterfly that was able to have that power and to break through, and I found my purpose. So for me, resistance is futile. So now that we're speaking about purpose and passion, let's go to the power of comms. And Shakespeare once said, the pen is mightier than the sword. So when I was asked to speak at this event, communications, PR, is absolutely vital, isn't it? We have to communicate, we have to speak. And the work that you're all doing is so important with the dialogue, especially in this time and age. Everybody Googles everything. Everyone's looking on LinkedIn, TikTok, Snapchat. The power of communication, the power of PR, and the work that you're all doing, potentially this could be your purpose, is to communicate to the world, right? Because when you think about comms, it's connected, it's global. What you say, people listen to. The media is extremely powerful, and especially in the space of diversity and inclusion, and especially in the space of belonging and equity, especially now, it's important. In the space of COVID, we need this information. We need this information to be correct. So the work that you all do and the work of communications and PR is, as I've said, is completely important, and it's global. And I want you all to think about, what's your passion? Is your passion in this space? And if it's not, it's probably your purpose. If you're here and you enjoy it, the pen is mightier than the sword. So it starts with you. Think about the work that you do. How do you do your work? How do you communicate? Who are the audiences that you speak to? Hold that power, embrace that power, and understand that what you do is really, really important in these times, especially in the times that we're in at the moment. When you're thinking about communications, how inclusive are your thoughts? How inclusive is your work? How are you doing that? And what I'd want to talk about now is the inclusive mindset. Yeah. So when you look at this picture, this image, it's a mindset, it's colorful, it should be a level playing field. We're talking about, what do you bring to the table? Who are the people that you're serving? Who are your audiences? When we do talk about being inclusive and inclusivity, I always say to people, let's take off the corporate mask. Because when it comes to thinking and having bias, it really starts with self. Hate is not learned behavior. Sorry, it's not work behavior, it's learnt behavior. It's around how you think from your generations. What are your values? What are your beliefs? How do you bring that into the workplace? How do you put that when you're typing, when you're doing your keyboard work, when you're doing your pen work, if you're a person who's a writer or prefers to use the pen? Take off that mask and think about, who's going to read this? Who am I impacting? Because as I've said before, commsHERO, look at the name of this week, commsHERO. When we think about a hero, who's a hero? And when it comes to communication, it's really important that we think like that. So remove that corporate mask and remove that mask of what people think or how we should think or how we should be. When we talk about inclusion and that mindset, again, we speak of the elephant in the room. Why are we not brave enough to step into the safe space? Do we have the psychological safety with the people around us to say how we're really feeling? And for me, brave is vulnerability. The V in brave is vulnerability. We have to show a level of vulnerability to be brave. And is there a piece of work that you really want to write, but what are people going to think? Am I thinking about the people who's going to read it? Do we have the right voices in the room? So confront and be brave, and don't F everything and run, face everything and rise, and remove that elephant from who's in the room. The other thing is bias. When we think about how we were raised or how we think or how we write, is the language inclusive? Are your terminologies inclusive? Do you have a level of bias that you're just not addressing, or maybe probably didn't realize it was there? We need to be awake, we need to be aware, we need to understand that different people have different opinions. And that's really where the magic happens, isn't it? So we always talk about affinity bias, where you tend to think like others or you tend to be like people who are like you. But when you're looking at the communications that's being written, when you're looking at the work that you do, the people you're engaging with, the people who's in the room, are you advocating or are you being compliant? And I think bias is a really, really important factor that we all need to look at when we are doing any piece of work, especially if it's external facing and we have other people that are going to be looking at the work that we do. So we've spoken about the elephant in the room. We've spoken about having a mindset where you include people, where you think about others. If it shouldn't have to happen to you, to matter to you. And that's another thing that I think is really, really important. We go on with our daily lives, but when you have an impact of the work that happens in comms and PR, it's quite influential, as we know. You know, we have clickbait at the moment. People put anything down to click it and the information is not correct or valid. So look at bias. Are we being compliant or are we not? Voices in the room. Let's have all the voices in the room. Let's have people from different places, different heritage, different cultures. Why not? I read something in Forbes a few months ago, and it says when you're recruiting somebody for a band, you don't recruit all the guitarists, do you? You want a drummer. You want someone who can play the saxophone. You want somebody who can play the piano and even the keyboard. They're similar, but they're not the same. And that's the same thing that we're saying around having that inclusive mindset, having that awakeness, having that awareness. Yes, it can be tiresome to hear about some of these topics all the time, but it's because there's nothing changing. And who doesn't want to live in a world where we think of others? Who doesn't want to do that? So when you're doing anything in your work, when you're thinking about topics or thinking about areas that you're going to be kind of delivering to the world, are the right voices in the room? Have you thought about the other person? Even down to the text, even down to the words. Are they offensive? Have you thought about it? And I think it's important that we do have the right voices in the room and we do have those conversations because they are really, really important. So when we go back to that 5-year-old child that you saw further on when I just started talking, that shy person who still exists, who still has those limiting beliefs, but still wants to speak up. I call myself a positive disruptor now. I look at it that I have a voice and I want to say things and I want to protect and I want to educate. And when we talk about inclusion, communications, comms is so important, whether it's internal or external. It's the vehicle to send that message. And what does that messaging actually look like? I'm a massive, massive fan or advocator of equity, equality, and belonging. I find that diversity and inclusion could potentially be quite divisive because people feel excluded when we say D&I now. It's become so trendy. And again, that goes back to language, doesn't it? And this is a fantastic quote, which says, equality is giving everybody a pair of shoes. Equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that fit. You often will see that it's equity versus equality. And I don't believe that. They have to go hand in hand. And when you go hand in hand with equity and equality, that will then foster belonging. And these are all the things that we need for an inclusive mindset. So cultivating a culture of belonging is absolutely imperative, is absolutely important. And that should be the messaging that when we send anything out to anyone else or in the work that we do, we should be looking at belonging, equity, and equality. Because then, I'm sure we all know, I'm sure we can all think right now, when was a time I didn't belong? When was there a time that I felt rejected? And just like me, I didn't want to put my hands up at uni. I'm dyslexic, so I always get words wrong. I always say things the wrong way round. And I was always wondering, I don't want to say that because people might laugh at me. And I was really worried about what people would think. And there's many times I think we've all felt like we don't belong. So when it comes to the inclusive mindset, and that's why I didn't say, let's talk D&I, let's talk diversity and inclusion. I said, let's have an inclusive mindset. And to have an inclusive mindset is thinking about equality, equity, and belonging. And like I said previously, it shouldn't have to happen to you to matter to you. When that's cultivated, and when we think about all those magical things that can happen, that is where the magic happens, where people have a voice. It doesn't matter about accents. It doesn't matter if someone is differently abled. It doesn't matter about if they're a different color or a different gender or a different sexuality. But what it is the power is actually in many of your hands because of the work that you do. Because how many times have you heard, oh, I didn't read that, or I didn't understand that, or I didn't get that? Language, terminology, and having an inclusive mindset and getting people involved, getting those voices heard with the work that you do and the research that you do is imperative and really, really important. Thank you. So I don't know if we have questions. I think it's a Q&A. I know we started a bit late. And I'm going to step into my brave space. I haven't really spoken about my journey before, so that was quite difficult for me to probably say a lot of what I said, but I think it's important that we show vulnerabilities and that we share and journeys as well.
Thanks for that, Nichole. That was really powerful and a lot of, like you said, sharing your personal experience, but I know that's going to help a lot of people. I've been through some similar experiences and I wish I knew you then, because when you talked about fear and speaking up, it is really difficult. it takes everything, all your being to do the right thing and ultimately help other people in the long run. That's what it's going to do. So yeah, well done. And I think you are really brave. Yeah, like I said, absolutely powerful stuff. We don't have any questions that have come in, but I wanted to just ask about, I know you touched on it there and gave some pointers and things, but I feel like now if I was in a similar situation, I would speak up, and I'd feel a lot more confident about doing that because I've done it before. But if somebody out there was going through, inequalities, feeling left out, things like that, what would be your first tip? Because, what should they do in the first instance? Because it is a big thing to do.
It is. And are you speaking in a working environment?
Yes, or any really, but yeah, working to start with.
Because I think the first thing would be is to step into that brave space and to call it out. Because if you don't say, some people genuinely don't think they're saying anything wrong or doing anything wrong. But the other side of that, to be fair, is that people will say, well, Nichole, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I don't say anything. And that's not just about race, it's around anything that anybody's uncomfortable about. But that dialogue, that communication has to start. You can have policies, you can have procedures, you can have laws, of course you can, and they're all needed. But it's about changing hearts and minds. It's really about, I look at diversity and inclusion as almost like you're telling people to be decent human beings, which is shocking. That's that, it's just basically telling people, just be kind. Just be kind.
Absolutely. And so would you say the same in a non-working environment about calling it out?
I would. And I think at the moment, there's a lot around diversity and inclusion, as we all know. And what I found with the clients that I speak to and people that I speak to, because the organization is embracing it, they're saying that they're more comfortable to speak about things they probably wouldn't have. But then when they're in their own environments, they're not as comfortable. So I remember I had a senior leader say to me, Nichole, I would call this out in the office, but if I went to a football match, I wouldn't. And he said that bothers him because maybe he doesn't have that safety or that safe space, because at work, you're being taught it, aren't you? You've got your internal comms, the organization is saying, this is on our agenda, this is now our mission, these are now our values. But if you're outside and you're around people who don't have that kind of nurturing or that initiation at work, their mindsets are completely different. So people, it's harder even if you're around a group of people that think in a certain way.
Absolutely, yeah, that does make sense. I've never really thought about it like that, but yeah, that does make perfect sense. I know from circles I move in and conversations I've had, I've got friends who, going back to what you said, where sometimes they don't think what they've said is offensive or wrong.
Right.
And it is about, like you said, educating them as well. So having that real honest conversation and that two-way dialogue. Because then I have got friends as well that don't say anything because they're scared of saying the wrong thing. Yeah. And, and they say they're constantly walking on eggshells, which is awful. You don't want anyone to feel like that. So I think you're right, having those conversations. I know when I've had them, they're uncomfortable to begin with, but they're quite insightful and moving towards the right direction once you open up and start having them. It is an eye-opener and it is an experience. But you've got to get past that initial uncomfortable stage, don't you?
Yeah, and it can be magical. And it's a two-way street as well. It's not a matter of putting all the onus on any one particular party. Because say, for example, we were having a conversation, and if you said something that offended me, I still have to be brave enough to say you've offended me, as opposed to walking away and thinking you meant that in a particular way. So again, it does go back to communication. It goes back to dialogue. So it's important that you do feel comfortable enough to say, I didn't actually like that. But then for the other person to say, why? What did I do wrong? And then for the other person to say, well, this is how it made me feel. And for example, I don't find the word coloured offensive at all. My grandmother used to use it all the time, but it's a very offensive word for many. But how would you know that? How would you know that it doesn't offend me? So you might say something else per se, and it's just a kind of pluck out the sky example. But if you don't speak and you don't have dialogue, how are you going to know? If you go abroad and you don't speak the language, you do find a way. I mean, I know Google's great for translating everything, but you do find a way to communicate when you want something, right? And when you want to know. So, and it's the same thing, just that it takes you out of that comfort zone and it takes you into fear mode that I spoke about in the beginning.
Yes.
And we all have that in your stomach, like, I just don't want to do this. So we run, right? We go the opposite direction. And that's what people do. And that's what we do. It's human nature. But in this space, if we want to make things better around inclusion and having that inclusive mindset, it is a matter of stepping into that brave space and facing it and rising.
Absolutely, yes, some valid points there, and about moving past that initial, uncomfortable, you've offended me sort of thing, and it can be about anything. And I suppose the alternative is you don't say anything. Something's offended you. You're the one that's sort of in that punishment mode because you're thinking about it all the time. You've run away from it. You haven't had that conversation. It's a horrible feeling, isn't it?
It is.
For a lot longer than having that conversation. It wasn't that long ago, actually, I said to a friend, it wasn't to do with race or anything like that. It was just the tone, and you know how texts and WhatsApps and things like that, you can get the tone wrong. So there was a bit of dialogue happening, and then there was a comment that I don't know if, I took the wrong way or got the tone wrong, but I said it, I wouldn't have done it in the past. And I did say I found that quite offensive. And there was this conversation where I thought this could either go two ways here, and I'm really scared. You can either go, they shout at you and go, that's ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. But it didn't. It went in a really nice way, and there was an apology at the end, and just a bit, again, education about this is how that particular comment made me feel. And then we had a conversation, and it stopped happening now. So it was great.
So it's and sometimes it can be confrontational because nobody wants to be told off, or nobody really wants to know they've offended someone. But it's just, as I say, it's just around changing hearts and minds. We make it seem so difficult, but it is just about having that dialogue. And you do have the lump in the throat and say, I'm actually going to say something. But like I mentioned when I was speaking earlier, like, you don't even want to put your hand up at school to ask a question. It's all, it's that same type of feeling that you just don't want to be pointed out. So you just don't say anything. But then it almost seems like if you don't say anything, you're being compliant. And that's not necessarily true. It's just that you don't know what to say or how to say it. And sometimes it's a matter of saying, I really want to talk to you about this, but I'm not sure how. How do I talk? What do I say? And then, as you say, the conversation can be magnificent. You can just have an open conversation and you'll be amazed how much people do actually have in common.
Yes. Yeah, I have found that. It is wonderful how you have found your calling and you can really tell your passion. I'm sure if anyone's got any other questions, can they connect with you on Twitter, LinkedIn? What's the best way to?
I'm on both, to be fair. It's the only two that I kind of understand.
Okay. Brilliant. I'll give you a follow because I'm sure I'd like to chat to you more about that. And I'm sure there'll be other people out there because I know a few people on this, on commsHERO Week, separately to this, we've had conversations about similar situations and what do you do? How do you start that conversation? So I know a lot of people have been there. So I'm sure they found this really useful.
I hope so. And it's around belonging, like I said before. It's around that sense of wanting to belong. And, more connects us than separates us, honestly. We've got more in common. We have to start removing those labels. It's like, who is Nichole underneath all of the stuff that I do? I'm not just a Black female or a grandmother or, a wife or what have you. There's so much more to us as people. And then when you have that conversation, you realize that there's so much you have in common.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Nichole. That was fantastic. I'm just going to wrap up, but if you want to stay there before we end the session, because there's just a few things that I want to bring up to remind people. So we have been running a competition. So if people want to join in, you just need to take photographs of you on the tables or just any of the speakers and tweet them to us at commsHERO, #commsHERO. We're also doing a pets. This makes me laugh. Lee makes me laugh at this because, it's a bit of an in-joke. But if you've got a pet, take a photo and tweet us again at #commsHERO. We are giving away vouchers for pets at home. We've got diaries and Sharpies We all love Sharpies, and the Amazon vouchers. So you could be one of the winners. We are picking them at the end of each day and then announcing them the following morning. So good luck with that. Don't forget, on Thursday from 8 p.m. After the speaker sessions, we have got an after party with two great guests. We've got Arthur Smith from BBC Radio 4 and Grumpy Old Men. I love Arthur, but I also love this next guest, who is Graham Park, who is the original Hacienda DJ. And this is free, and you don't have to be part of the comms community, but it is for you. You know, it's for everybody in this network, but you can share it as well with your friends. So have a little party. I know me and Lee are going to order some food, aren't we, Lee? And have a bit of a party here. So come and join us. We've had some stats in. So incredible first day with 500,000 impressions. So thank you to everyone for tweeting, sharing speaker quotes and things like that. Keep that going throughout the week. I really appreciate that. Tomorrow we've got lots more coming up. We've got a session from our sponsor, React and Share. We've actually got Graham Park, the DJ that I mentioned, talking to one of our regular commsHERO guests, Amy, and she will be discussing how he reinvents himself and stays current, and how he does his communication through music. And we'll also be joined by TV's Nick Knowles, the Chief Constable of Northants Police, Tom Gamer, who's a Formula One broadcaster, Harry Tangi, who's a former firearms sergeant, and me, because we're going to be talking about social media, communications and policing. So that's going to be an interesting one. And then lastly, I'd like to say thank you again to some of our sponsors: Red Kite Community Housing, Staff Base, Prezi, React and Share, and First Up. We couldn't have done this without you. So thank you. And thank you, Nichole, for ending today with that fantastic session.
Thank you.
Thanks.